Amazon Q4 is the Olympics for brand. It was a really rough year for merchants, brands, and sellers. Number one is let's just quickly talk about cutoff dates, formal cutoff dates that are going into Amazon. And because of this new product launch, Amazon isn't giving you enough, call it allowance, inside of your inventory to ship in bulk amounts. So not many places like AMZ Prep can do this high volume kitting production. I think this Q4 is going to be one of the most challenging for merchants. The reason that they want to prioritize West Coast facilities is, and in this video, I'm going to be breaking down our survival kit of how to avoid late check-in times, dominate Q4 from an inventory allocation, and make sure you avoid the freight disasters that can happen during Q4 during the craziest time of the year. I'm going to be breaking it all down in our Prepping for Q4 episode here. So in this episode, I'm going to be breaking down the exact playbook to follow over the next 30, 60, and 90 days to avoid out of stocks, avoid late deliveries, keep your product available inside of Amazon, and dominate Q4 from all things inventory logistics. First and foremost, before we think about this Q4, let's reflect on what happened last Q4. So some of the key challenges that we saw was that brands got hit with one of the worst out of stocks that happened inside of Amazon. Number two was that AWD, which is Amazon's warehousing and distribution, which I did a big podcast on in the past, failed in instance. It blocked inventory. You couldn't get stock out. Inventory was basically frozen, which costed a lot of brands their entire Q4 revenue. Number three was we saw check-in times basically 10x. There were some Amazon FC locations that actually blocked their doors, which means they rejected shipments entirely. So some people were sending containers directly overseas with AGL to FBA. The ones that were doing that completely got stock rejected and were scrambling. Some other ones got stock received, but it was an FC transfer processing, wasn't available. It was a really rough year for merchants, brands, and sellers. And we hope that this year is going to be a little bit different, but we want to be pessimistic on this podcast. And we also want to make sure that you are prepped for exactly what's going to happen and you have a backup plan. And then you have a backup plan for the backup plan, right? I think what we've learned over the years is that everyone has a plan till you get punched in the face. And Amazon Q4 is exactly that. So here's some of the things I want to go through. Number one is let's just quickly talk about cutoff dates. Formal cutoff dates that are going into Amazon. So we traditionally start seeing a surplus around August and September is when brands start to basically call it oversupply Amazon, which I'll get to afterwards and some of the challenges behind it. But the formal dates going into October is, so October 15th is when the Amazon meltable ban actually lifts. Amazon meltable ban specifically for chocolates, any products that might get flagged as meltable that isn't allowed inside of Amazon's facilities. October 15th is the day they actually get live, which causes this huge surge on more of the CPG, protein bars, chocolate bars, supplements, and so forth, that inbound. Number two is October 19th. October 19th is the actual deadline of Black Friday, Cyber Monday, Prime Day, where you have a guarantee with Amazon that they'll be able to check in product in time. Again, they highly advise against October. September is the most critical time, but the formal date on paper is the 19th. November 28th is the official date for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. So there's actually a huge stretch there because Amazon inbounds slowed down so much in Q4, and that's their formal date. And then technically December 1st is the last date if you want to get your stock in for Christmas itself. Now, do we see brands stretch these timelines? Yes, it happens every single year. But if you want to play by the book, that's the dates that you want to be following. Forecasting strategy. There's a lot of ways you can do this. One of the challenges that we've seen is that most brands right now, last year, would over-index on their Amazon stock going into Q4. So they would just flood the Amazon FBA facilities with as much stock as possible. Now, what happened was that, they stayed in stock, but their storage charges were through the roof. Right? So Amazon charges $2 something per cubic foot in Q4, right? Standard 78 cents, which is still really expensive, but it's 5 times that going into Q4. So while you stayed in stock, you over-indexed your inventory. You had 45 or 60 days of stock worth there. And then you got killed with storage, right? We saw some of these larger brands with multi-million-dollar storage invoices in October, November, December. So that was a huge challenge. But what changed this year was a little friend called ASIN level inventory. And so what ended up happening was that even if you wanted to able to over index, right, and over ship into Amazon. So what merchants are dealing with now is that they have a minimum and then they have a maximum of what they can send in. So some brands are actually limited that they actually can't send 60, 90 days of stock, which is suggested in Q4. Usually we're only hovering around maybe 30 days because of how fast we can check in stock with our middle mile. But in this instance, some brands want to send in 90 days, which is valid. But because of ASIN level inventory limits, they're literally not able to. Or maybe you have a new product launch. And because of this new product launch, Amazon isn't giving you enough, call it allowance inside of your inventory to ship in bulk amount. And there's a few workarounds, right? So you can potentially raise the ticket if you have a good Amazon team, if you have an SAS rep. There's a few ways that you can get around to try to request more inventory allowance. But at the end of the day, like that is a huge problem that's getting posed. So on an inventory basis, there's a ton of ways that you can model it. This episode is not exactly that from an inventory side. There's great products like Feliber, for example, on the inventory tool. Amazon has their own internal, which is a little bit more simple in terms of its thought process. But my takeaway from this, more than importantly, is that you want to backfill from basically August onward. So September is one of our biggest months out of the year. People think it's in October, November. If for the fulfillment side it is, but on the prep side, we're getting all the stock in. So August, September is when almost all containers are loaded and we're really pushing for inbounds. But again, because of our volume going to Amazon, we don't need to backfill a ton. So even right now, our strategy isn't to keep in 60 days worth because your storage costs will kill your margins. We're hovering around 30, 40 days worth of inventory. And then as needed, we have our trucks going daily. So then we can just start pushing stock accordingly. But planning starts in August. Some of the things we have seen work going into Q4 is that depending on your inventory allowance, if you're not using AMZ Prep as a partner, who because of this, we expedite inbounds to be a few days versus a few weeks. If you're doing it yourself and you get yourself caught in Q4, one of the ways that you can get around this is you can potentially explore something like a small parcel, right? So going into Q4, I would avoid LTL with a plague unless you're using a partner like us. And the reason for it is that LTL shipments will get sent to a national cross-dock. They'll then consolidate you with multiple different pallets and then get to a full truck to send it through. Going into Q4, when we talk about the overall inbound strategy, a couple things to keep in mind is that I did a whole episode on this, but we want to avoid the national cross-docks. That is where Amazon AWD stock's going, and it's going to become the bottleneck of the overall operations going into Amazon. So things that will get you in the national cross-docks, right? Number one is that if you request Amazon to do the splits on your behalf, meaning if you're getting hit with placement fee, this means they're sending to a national because then they're splitting it to their regional DCs accordingly. Huge bottleneck. Happened last year. It will happen again. Keep that in mind if you're doing so. Secondly, when you're doing LTL shipments, it makes a lot more sense to split it 5 ways. But keep in mind, when you're doing LTL, usually the day you request isn't the day they're picking up, right? So Amazon might take a few days, 3, 5, a week or 2 to pick up the shipment. They need to send it to one of their hubs to consolidate. So Amazon Freight will then consolidate multiple LTLs, basically what we do at our consolidation hub, and then they'll ship full trucks. It will still be faster. So I would advise towards, if you need to, go LTL over FTL. But if you're in a rush last minute and you need to, I would actually personally suggest towards small parcel. Small parcel delivery is a terrible cost economics, but it is the fastest to get the product in. So if it's last minute, you're rushed for stock, you need something out, either send it through our consolidation hubs. So literally just send it to one of our facilities. We'll throw it in the back of our trucks, try to get to Amazon fast enough, or use your small parcel available. You want to split it 5 ways so you avoid the nationals and you do small parcel. It's not economical. It's not meant to be, but it's fast. And it should be hopefully checking into one of those 5 facilities. The other reason that we're splitting it 5 ways is because one Amazon DC is going to get bottlenecked. The other is going to be flowing. So we have to keep that in mind that every facility is going to have different check-in times and you can play that to your advantage when you're splitting it. Number 2 is that you actually want to have a backup plan for your operation. So one of those is understanding and have availability for maybe small parcel going into Q4 if you're not using us. And then FBM. So FBM as a business model isn't the best, right? We do seller fulfill prime, which is, light years ahead, but for some merchants, not realistic. They don't have the distribution. The economics don't make sense. So if you have a 3PL available, make sure that they set up FBM. It truly might if you already have stock in their warehouse and it's in the picking bins, FBM is a very low lift. More importantly, what this is, and you want to get mapped on Amazon. Don't just say they have FBM, literally set it up, have the integration, test orders, and have it available for, at least 80% of your top SKU catalog. What this allows you to do is that going into Q4, if there isn't out of stock, you have the ability, think of it almost like a light switch, to be able to turn on and off FBA and FBM, so that if a SKU does run out, some things we can't control or there is a challenge that happens, you can immediately toggle on Seller Central, basically the other option of it. So it's just a variant of that SKU, but it's an FBM version of the SKU. And it's almost like you have two buy boxes. You've probably seen some merchants that have a FBA and an FBM. This is because if for whatever reason FBA goes out of stock, it gets stranded. There's 101 reasons, is that your FBM will immediately start winning those sales. So instead of it plummeting and go down to zero, FBM is an amazing option, but again, it's better from an algorithm perspective than running out of stock. Running out of stock is like, it's a suicide mission. This is the next best bet. Number 3 is just evaluate where your shipments are going to. So we have a lot of vendors that want to prioritize our West Coast facilities. The reason that they want to prioritize West Coast facilities is because their shipments are coming from China or somewhere South Asia, and they want the thing closest to the port to save money. We're actually migrating and transitioning a lot of our brands to the East Coast. The reason for that, going into Q4, West Coast always gets bottlenecked first. One, because all the big sellers are on the West Coast, because anything coming from China or Chinese sellers are all sending it to those Amazon West Coast facilities. And so what happened last year was that there were several facilities on the West Coast that completely closed their doors. AWD was a big part of that, so West Coast shut down. But then on top of it, there was West Coast facilities that just shut, and they said, we're not accepting new inbounds. Brands that had containers going direct, so some brands actually send directly to the Amazon facility, they got rejected and didn't have a 3PL ready because they send directly. They don't need a 3PL. And naturally, they were scrambling to figure that out. And Amazon actually started incentivizing brands to ship it to their East Coast facilities. So we analyze thousands of data points across all these Amazon inbound facilities. And so we've migrated our top accounts to the East Coast. Even some of our larger merchants, we're creating a ship from address that's on the East Coast. We're putting inventory in East Coast locations. We want to prioritize East Coast locations as much as possible. And then when we split it 5 ways on top of that, the probability of one of those facilities getting checked in is much, much higher. So if you have the ability and you have the flexibility of your supply chain to prioritize East Coast, my personal suggestion would be is that going into Q4, if you need shipments there faster, even if you use a West Coast facility, create a shipping plan with the ship from somewhere on the East, a little bit of gray area, but this is what you need for Q4, and then use that as a ship from. That means that you will get splits across the East Coast and you're going to pay a lot more in freight getting it there. But your speed to Amazon and speed to check-in is the only metric that matters going into Q4. So similar to a small parcel delivery, is it the most economical? No, it's terrible. But your goal isn't for cost savings right now. It's to stay in stock, because one day of out of stock, if you're doing 100,000 a day, you can run the math pretty quickly. That could be $1 million mistake really quickly, along with long-term impact of algorithm because of the, out of stock impact and BSR and all things technical. The other thing I would suggest is that build a kitting plan. So if you are using a 3PL to do the prep, or going into 2026 Q4 where Amazon doesn't actually offer prep anymore, most 3PLs or prep centers need a production line of how quickly they can prep stock for Amazon, right? So not many places like AMZ Prep can do this high volume kitting production. So if you need your 3PL to do co-packing or polybagging or bubble wrapping, are you accounting for the 2 weeks that they need? And if you rush them, rushing a 3PL is never a good idea. And when you rush it, mistakes happen and it becomes, a blame game naturally. And for good reason. You need the stock into Amazon and that 3PL should move faster. But it's a prisoner's dilemma. And so make sure that if you are building out your forecasting model, if you need the warehouse to prep or just do an Amazon drop, how long does it take? Now, keep in mind, don't just consider how long it takes them, right? One of the key things that we analyze on our side, because one of our key value props is the speed and how quickly we can get into Amazon with our trucks. So how long does it take them from the time you drop it to the time they finish it? And then from the time they finish it to the time it actually checks in, not receives on Amazon, physically checks in inside the door. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 6 weeks? Is it 8 weeks? We usually see on average, it might be 20 to 40 days going into Q4. So plan that. So great, you might drop the shipment October 1st, but that means you might not actually get stock till November 1st. So these are calculations you have to keep in mind, or you might get caught. Some other hacks that we're doing going into Q4 is that we're floor loading all of our containers. We do this throughout the year. We do some that are actually pallet loaded, but floor loading, what this allows is for a live unload inside of Amazon. That just means faster check-in time. If you have the ability because of your size, you can do it. I would definitely explore it. If you have a Carrier Central account, you can actually pre-book appointments faster with floor loaded. So we get more density of appointments, they're faster appointments, and they're faster check-ins when we do these floor loaded shipments. But they're a little bit difficult. If you don't have full containers, it can be a little bit more challenging. And you obviously want to split it 5 ways to avoid placement fees and sending it to their national docks. I think more importantly, what we've seen for most brands is that we're actively having these conversations in July, August, September we host MBRs with all of our merchants. I would encourage you with your 3PL, if your partner, whoever is handling your Amazon logistics, really build out a production schedule. And on top of that, I encourage you yourself to go into your Seller Central or, reach out. We can actually do what we call like a speed analysis. So what we'll do is we'll get Seller Central access, we'll audit Amazon, and we'll give you the ugly truth of how long your shipments are taking, along with how much you're paying. But money is usually a secondary thought going into Q4, is about how quickly you can get in. So my suggestion would be have your conversation with your 3PL, plan production schedules accordingly, right? And on top of that, understand from a check-in time. So go into Seller Centrals, evaluate your last 10 shipment plans, and see how long on that journey from the time it got created to the time the first stock is checked in. This will be so critical. So number one, have a meeting with your 3PL. Number two, audit your inbounds, getting it to the Amazon facility. Number three, make sure that you have FBM set up as a secondary byproduct. Number four, make sure that you have small parcel deliveries on lock available. Number five, avoid NXID, which is their national cross docks like the plague, right? And I think the last part to keep in mind is that if you are using Amazon AWD, it is a program I talk a lot about. I get a lot of flack around it, but Amazon AWD was a very challenging program going into last year. They're bulk storing, and if they hold all of your inventory and you have time now to pull out some level of stock to diversify risk, I would highly encourage you to do so. Because AWD could be an incredible product, and they've made it a lot of adjustments from last year, but last year inventory got frozen. And that meant that no stock in, no stock out. It literally, the door shut entirely. And so if you're a brand planning for Q4, I would suggest pulling out some stock, at least have inventory allowance. And if you need to, you can always ship it in yourself, right? Like it's not the end of the world. So just send a small partial shipment in, move it to your 3PL, have inventory available that's outside of AWD. I would not put all my eggs in that basket going into the most important time of the year because you need that revenue more than Amazon does. That's my tactical playbook going into Q4. I think this Q4 is going to be one of the most challenging for merchants for a lot of different reasons, specifically around ASIN level limits, the new prepping production, AWD, Amazon check-in times are changing. It's going to be a little bit different. If you need our help, happy to do a placement fee analysis or something to give you visibility. And if you need to use our trucks getting into Amazon, DM me. Happy to support and see how we can help piggyback some of our shipments, even if you continue to use your own 3PL. But be safe, try to play by the rules, and good luck. May the best brand win.